Henry just asked me to say a few words about how we got here. It was 61 years ago, as nearly as I can tell, that Dr. Henry Kemp, who was only at that time 35 years of age and had been chairman of the Department of Pediatrics for a couple of years, which is pretty extraordinary. He was part of the international effort to eradicate smallpox. Again, pretty young to have that achievement, and was nominated once for the Nobel Prize in Medicine for that. He came here at 33 when Children's Hospital had only 3 other doctors. So much of what you see today began, it's not that Children's Hospital began with him, it's just that you can kind of see the beginning of what would become a partnership between the research teaching of the university and the private Children's Hospital back that far. So the Kemp Center has always been a program within the Department of Pediatrics. It hasn't had a separate institutional existence, but for a program and a Department of Pediatrics and a medical school, a lot has come out of the work of Dr. Kemp and the center that he established in 1972. And because this is a short note or two about our history, I'll pass over how difficult it was for Dr. Kemp and Dr. Silver and other colleagues to bring attention to the problem of child abuse and neglect. It wasn't until 1972 that he received sufficient funding to establish what he hoped would be actually a federal program, but not getting any support for that, he decided he had to go ahead. And so the National Center for the Prevention and Treatment of Child Abuse and Neglect was established in 1972 under funding of the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation and a number of several others. But all of that probably doesn't matter to you, because what really was important was it was the beginning of the tradition we all share. And there have been an awful lot of people. Most importantly, I think there's been a lot of people who cared. I don't think this will ever be easy work. The last kind of work that we really have chosen to think of as a big issue has been caregiving or emotional work, because we've always been able to see physical work and decide how much to pay for it. And we've been able to see the results of intellectual work in the form of a play, a score of music, an airplane, a government. But emotional labor, which has more often been the portfolio of women than of men, although there's certainly men who have acquired that ability or learned it as children, experienced it as children. And so I think in that way, we're very early in a very long-term effort to perhaps reduce some of the problems that humanity experiences because they haven't done well enough at giving care. Here's one thing to remember, that is that we're dealing with a problem that once was ignored. It wasn't until 58 that, yes, we had prevention of cruelty to children efforts, but it was a moral enterprise. It was not a scientific enterprise. One could argue that we're still struggling to make the work of child protection evidence-based. But at least we know that there's a problem. We know there's a problem in part because of a permanent link on the Centers for Disease Control website for ACEs, or Adverse Childhood Experiences, which documents the physical illnesses and behavioral illnesses and the other life hazards that are incurred at a much greater rate if you had that early childhood trauma, and in particular abuse and neglect, because good care is immunizing against so many things, and poor care can itself be the source of terrible harm. So that's something to hang on to. I'm in the second generation of this problem. People watching this are either in the second or third generation. It was discouraging in the beginning to Doctors Kemp, Steele, and I include Ruth Kemp. And to the point that said, look, we're not going to get this done overnight. It's going to be at least a 5-generation problem. So recognition has improved a great deal. The data in the United States, where we have reporting laws and we keep track of these things, is that we've made progress almost every place except neglect. I guess I'm not terribly worried about the fact that we don't seem to have made progress in neglect, because it's a much broader subject. There's a lot more to it. And the absence of things are always more difficult to recognize and to address than things that are present, as in the form of a fracture, or a brain injury, or a burn. Going forward, there are problems that we still haven't been able to resolve. We don't know how to triage yet. We don't know who we can treat better than who else. And we don't know of our various interventions, treatment programs, which ones are most efficacious for which families and which individuals. And we're very loath or reluctant to admit our limitations. One of the powerful things that David Olds did in his nurse-family partnership was to indicate that there is no justification for his program for certain families and for certain individuals. In particular, for example, for mothers who have a high enough degree of self-efficacy. So we have the challenge of figuring out who we should pay attention to first and why we know that, what programs we should have to treat who, and what's the cost benefits of each of these programs. We still haven't really figured out, I think, adequately how to organize a problem which has a health nature problem, it's a behavioral health problem, it's a legal and social problem, it's a moral problem. And humans being humans, we all want to seize the high ground and claim great superiority for whatever it is we do. When from the very beginning, I would like to go back to Henry Kemp, who said that in a democracy, children don't belong to anyone except to themselves, in care of their parents. And if the parents did minimally well, then the rest of us had nothing to say about it. But if they didn't do minimally well, then we had a trust, a stewardship, an obligation on the behalf of that child as any citizen to intervene to prevent further harm. I think I would like to remember what Dr. Steele used as his measure of people's contribution to problems. He thought it was really essential, if you were going to be a healthy member of a program that dealt with child abuse and neglect, or for that matter, if you were going to have a reasonably good life, but you really needed to have someplace else outside of the center. Henry Kemp used to say, you can't get all your gratification from working with some of our families. Then the most important thing you ought to be able to do is recognize your own contribution to problems. So if you want to have a major effort towards preventing child abuse, then you remember that just a little bit of extra care can make a huge difference. And knowing our own contributions to the problem is also very important before you can do that well.